Last week it was one occasion. This week the ladies are gone on retreat. And so I'm a hobo this weekend myself. Get my wife back sometime today. I don't know exactly when that's going to be. And I look forward to her appearance. But meanwhile, it's good to see you here. We're in the book of Acts, and we're looking at a variety of chapters here this morning. Somewhat in chapter 4, toward the tail end in chapter 5. And if you'd like to look in the Pew Bible and you don't know where the book of Acts is, you can start on page 965 in that book in front of you. And that'll start you out in Acts chapter 1. Help you keep up. As we've been going through this study that we're going through, particularly from the book of Acts, it's not exactly covered text by text by text, but rather we're hitting so far some topics. Now, we dealt with text to some degree as far as the beginning of the church and some things that took place in Acts chapter 2. And a bit of review as we look at this. I want you to realize that where I'm coming from is I'm looking at this as this is my family, my heritage. It's our heritage as Christians of who we are and what we're about. And today I want to examine attitudes. And we're going to look at a variety of places, mostly in chapters 4 and 5 and etc. But there's going to be some good things and some bad and ugly things because God doesn't hide from us what went on. But He expects for us to learn from that. And so He leaves it in there intentionally. He doesn't just put out the good stuff. You know how we do at family gatherings? At least we try to put out the good things and hide the bad. Well, God lets you see it all so we can learn either way. A quick review from Acts chapter 3 and 4 that we did last week. Peter and John went up into the temple. And as they went into the temple, they met a lame man. And they healed that man there. And because of that, and that man had been over 40 years old, was up jumping around, and he'd been lame all of his life, it kind of caused a crowd to gather. And when that crowd came up to where the apostles were, and the man still jumping with excitement and praising God, the apostles took advantage of that situation and began to preach about Jesus. Just like they did basically in chapter 2 of the book of Acts, when all that sound and that noise came about and the crowd came to see what was happening, they preached Jesus then. So now they're doing that. That didn't sit very well with the Jewish leaders. Chapter 4, because of the large crowds and the people were jealous, the Jewish leaders, they became greatly disturbed. This is not just a little bit now, but immensely bothered by this. They put Peter and John in prison. And then the next day, in chapter 4 and following, verses 5 and 6, Peter and John are on trial. And it's for a massive group of religious leaders, the Jewish people. And as they're on trial, they're expecting, of course, Peter and John to be intimidated. They expected fear out of them, and rather than that, they saw courage and boldness out of them. They expected them to just kind of hunker down and look a little measly or whatever, and instead of doing that, they began to preach about Jesus. And they preached about His death and His resurrection, and they just got through the leaders telling them, don't talk about that to these people. Well, let me tell you about it. And they went ahead and did it, and they didn't sit on top of that. And no other name under heaven is given that man would be saved. You're in the wrong ballpark, He's telling them basically. And the Jewish leaders were astounded that they behaved that way. They knew that they were just unlearned men, amongst them, fishermen basically. And they said they took note that these men had been with Jesus. That time that those apostles spent with Jesus and witnessing His resurrection made all the difference. And that's a challenge for us. And we looked at that last week. Spending time strengthening ourselves. Being what we ought to be. Listening to the Word of God. What Jesus says. So we can't walk with Him like the apostles did. But we can still listen to His message, reading it, and spending time in prayer and communing with God. That's our challenge to walk with Jesus. So that will make a difference in our life. Are you doing that? Keep at it. It's not a one-time thing. And it's not just on Sundays and Wednesdays. It's in the private times in our home. That we open that book up and we read about that. Well, the next part I want to look at here is God's invitation to examine the attitudes in our family heritage. And you probably have a picture up there. Yeah, you've got the family up there. And I just grabbed a hold of some old picture that obviously if you've got a family shot, you probably have in your family history some unusual poses. It may not be intentionally that way, but we all have some unusual people in our family. And I always think, there's nothing like taking a look at our family history. We don't have to go too far back in the Schoenhoff clan. My name's Schoenhoff, by the way, last name. And to see some unusual people. And we can go back a little further and we can find out some very unusual things in our family. Well, the church has a family. And so we're going to be looking at individuals like Barnabas in the latter part of Acts chapter 4. A married couple called Ananias and Sapphira. Those are two unusual names. Barnabas, you hear that name today. We've got a guy named Barney comes here to church. But Ananias, I hadn't met anybody like that before. And then we're going to talk about the apostles a bit too. Attitudes of each one of these people. So let's start with Barnabas in chapter 4 of the book of Acts. And we're going to read verses 32 down to 37 here, 36 at least. So if you've got your text open with me, let's read verse 32. Now the multitude of all those who believed were of one heart and one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of these things he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. They didn't mind sharing. They were particularly mindful of all those people. Remember, go back here to chapter 2 of Acts, and it's just a day or two ago that a lot of these people came from all these different regions for the Jewish festival, Pentecost. Now all of a sudden they're Christians. They were baptized. 5,000 of them by the time we get to the middle part of chapter 4. 5,000 men, rather. Not telling how many women. And huge masses of people. And they're still hanging around Jerusalem. Well, the credit cards don't exist in that day and time, and they need to survive. And so people started selling belongings and things. They didn't have bank accounts like we do much back then, and so they just did what they could to make sure everybody could hang around a bit longer, to have that time of fellowship, and especially in studying God's Word. So they didn't worry about who owned what. They just shared. Verse 33 says, and with great power the apostles gave witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them. Nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all of them who were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and they brought the proceeds and the things that were sold. And they just laid them at the apostles' feet. And then they distributed them to anyone who had need. And Joseph, some translations use Joseph, who was also named Barnabas by the apostles. I want you to see who named him Barnabas. The apostles. Because the word Barnabas in that language means really son of encouragement. So Barney's our encourager here at Central. He's the son of encouragement. That's what Barnabas means. Well, he was a Levite from the country of Cyprus. And having land, he sold it. And he brought the money and he laid it at the apostles' feet. He said, here you go. Let's keep this church going. Some years ago, we hit some rough times. And we had some people that dug deep into some of their bank accounts. And they came up and said, we want to keep the church going. And they did a whole lot to make sure that our mission work and our message got out. That was encouraging for me. And so many of us here who needed that. Well, this is exactly what we're talking about. Now, as we're dealing with this guy here, Barnabas, I want you to see that this attitude of generosity was so vital. You know, God loves a cheerful giver, the Bible says. You know that 1/3 of all of Jesus' teaching is about giving? Does that make you feel a little uneasy? 1/3 of what he says. In one way or another, sometimes there was symbolism about more than just giving, but it had to do with giving. The power of attitudes is so immense that they gave this guy a whole brand new name, son of encouragement. This guy, because of what he chose to do. So I want to talk about attitudes because it is so powerful, so influential among people, the attitudes that we have. And number one here, as we're looking at this particular one, or highlighting here, is Barnabas and the importance of giving. And the fact that God describes himself as a giver. You know John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Yes. That whosoever would believe on him would not perish but have everlasting life. It could have been written, for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son. And that would have been true. But God chose to use the word gave. God is a giver. Generosity is a part of God. He is rich in grace and mercy, Ephesians chapter 2 says, and he likes giving it out. He likes being merciful, and he likes us being givers. How important it is for us to remember to be givers to one another and to God, and have that generous spirit about us that when you do that, it encourages people in some ways that you just can't imagine. It makes us all feel better. And we need that in the day that we live, in the days we live like we live today. Well, number two, Ananias and Sapphira. Now, it's a Christian couple. You can imagine the congregation, they were probably involved in a lot of different things. And they sold a piece of land too. And they turned around and they gave money to the apostles. But the problem was, they lied about part of it. Now, let's pick up in chapter 5. We're following right behind the story about Barnabas, or Joseph as he was named, and then nicknamed Barnabas. Now as we pick up in verse 1. But a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira his wife sold a possession. So the two of them got together on this. Verse 2 says, and he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it. And he brought a certain part and he laid it at the apostles' feet. Sounds a whole lot like what Barnabas just did. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart? Ooh, he's not getting the same nickname. He's filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back part of the price of the land for yourself. Now, could he have just kept back part? Let's read on and see what God says here. So, Peter's talking, and he says, while it remained, that piece of land, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not under your control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. The problem was not that they just gave part of it. If somebody takes something and sells it today, or comes and volunteers to give a part of what he has, and he says, I'm going to contribute this part. Not a problem. But what they were doing is they were doing just like Barnabas did, and they're coming up and saying, boy, we sold that property, and this is all we got out of it. And they kept back part of it. They lied about it. Verse 5, and Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. So great fear came upon all those who heard these things. And the young men arose and wrapped him up and carried him out and buried him. You can imagine, just right there on the spot, all of this just, whew. Now mind you, there's something going on in this whole process. God doesn't strike us down, aren't you grateful, every time we sin, or every time we've lied. But in this situation, an attitude of dishonesty began to creep in the church in a way that was especially devious because they were lying to the apostles. The apostles basically are representing God at this point on earth. Now, they're not God. They're not taking Jesus' place. But nonetheless, they are there with God's authority. So when you're standing before the apostles and you're saying, this is the way it is, it's testing them. Can you really see me or not? Do you know if I'm being truthful? And they saw it. And you don't lie to God, basically, is what's being described here. They're attesting the power of the apostleship and the connection between them and God. And so this lie was not just a lie, but a test of apostleship. And God wasn't letting that pass, because his apostles were his representatives in every way. Imagine the other side here. If the apostles had done nothing, or God just let it pass and didn't reveal it to the apostles. And then later it was discovered. Well, they pulled one over on the apostles. Apostles stood up and said, oh, that's great. You just gave everything, and they didn't do it. Then the apostles weren't much of an apostle, were they? So God stopped it right there. That dishonesty. You can't fool God. Along with that goes hypocrisy. They wanted to look good like Barnabas. They wanted their own nickname. Give us Barnabas 2 and 3. Or the Barnabas couple. And they were very hypocritical in the process. So God's revealing attitudes. Barnabas, great generosity. Ananias and Sapphira, if you read the rest of it, Sapphira is in on it, and we don't have time to read the whole part. But dishonest and hypocritical. God wants sincere Christians and honest Christians. Matter of fact, the word sincere itself is a really unusual term. Comes from the Greek or the Latin meaning without wax. You think, well, what's that got to do with it? Well, back in that day and time when they made statues and they fired them in the oven, sometimes there were the gods or whatever around there, and they came out of the oven, occasionally they would crack, as would ceramic pieces do. And so before the guys would glaze them over, the people that made them, not wanting to lose money on it, would fill in the cracks with wax. And then they covered it over with gold or silver or whatever. It looked like a whole good piece, knowing that maybe a month or so down the road it'd just crumble and fall apart. So when the guys would be out buying things in the store, whether it be a piece of pottery or a statue or whatever, they'd say, is that without wax? In other words, is it really good or not? Is it sincere, without wax? And thus the word sincere. Is it true, deep down to its core? That's what God wants out of Christians. He wants us to have a without wax attitude. No cracks, no crumbles. Be genuine all the way down to the core. That's why we talk about singing from our heart and praying from our hearts and having an honest heart before God. God's looking for that. And so He'll show us the bad side so we can recognize what He really is after on the good side. Well, let's look at the apostles' attitude for just a moment here. We're going to dip back into chapter 3 for just a moment in verses 12 and 13. And we read this last week, but I want to come back to it again. As the apostles are out in the temple area, and they've just healed this guy that had been lame, and Peter's taking advantage of the opportunity to preach, and here's this guy just so excited. You can imagine, or can we? 40 years that guy's been outside at that temple begging his entire life, and all of a sudden now he can jump around and excited and walk and all of what he never had before. Maybe as a young boy, kind of like some of us who grew up not having maybe some things and wishing, boy, I wish I could walk, wish I could go play, wish I could do. And then as he got older, boy, I wish I didn't have to come to the temple and beg. I'd like to go out and that's all he could do. And now he's excited. Well, look at verses 12 and 13. So when Peter saw it, the people that were all amazed at what's going on, he responded to the people, Men of Israel, why do you marvel at this? Or why do you look so intently at us, as though by our own power or godliness we had made this man to walk? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he goes on to talk. This is the one that did it. Been a great opportunity for these apostles. Well, you hang around with us, you're going to have all kinds of good things. Come see us, we can do all kinds of things. It was like, hey, don't look at us as being anything different. You see the humility there? In their actions? That they were working miracles. But they said, it's not us, not me. When we do things, whatever God's ability that's in us allows us to do those things, whether it's speaking or serving or making or repairing or whatever it is, always add a good, healthy dose of humility along with it. Make sure that as you are there and someone thanks you for it, well, I appreciate it, but God's just good to me. And I know that backfired one day. I heard a preacher talking, and back door, and a lady on the way out the door said, well, that was just a great lesson. And he goes, well, it was just God. She goes, no, wait a minute, wasn't that good now? So it can backfire on you, but humility is so important. The apostles wrestled with this a long time, actually. There's a part in verse 12 of chapter 4, rather verse 2, where they pray for more boldness. So the humility was an action in prayer, and I'm not going to take a lot of time to deal with that. I want you to go back and look at that on your own. But that prayer was so honest and sincere. But that attitude of humility was not always in the apostles' heart. They had some pride they had to deal with. You remember a lot of times when they were walking with Jesus, they got in arguments with one another over who was the greatest. And it's nice to see they change. That humility versus that pride. Sometimes we're just, we're face in front of face. We're just, I'm better than you are. And that is not what God wants out of us. And our pride can really get in the way of making us what we ought to be. You remember what James wrote in the book of James? Quoting something similar to that from the Old Testament. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and He'll lift you up. What was the words of Jesus? For he that wants to be exalted will be humbled. But he who humbles himself, he'll be exalted. God will take care of that if we just do our part and give Him the credit. Well, besides humility, the apostles had an act of devotion too. And I really admire that. Let's get back into chapter 5 here. As everything is transpiring in this whole process, they are just on trial, in and out continually. They get imprisoned again in chapter 5. They'd already gotten out of one trial situation. And as they're in prison, it doesn't look like it's going real good. Verse 26, the captain went with the officers and brought them without violence, that is Peter and John, and because they feared the people, it says, lest they be stoned. And when they brought them, verse 27, they set them before the council. Again, this huge, august, powerful group. And the high priest asked them, saying, did we not strictly command you not to teach in this name? And look, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine, and intend to bring this man's blood on us. Look what verse 29 says. But Peter, with the other apostles, answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. I know our lives are on trial right now. I don't care. You're not going to hush us. God's number one in our life. I'm going to be devoted to Him. You're going to do something with us? Do it. I remember some time ago, a friend of mine was doing work in Guatemala as a missionary. This was years ago. And he was with one of the local Guatemalans, and the two of them were going through this area, and this militia came and stopped the two of them on the road. And this guy said, he was telling him about this story, that the militia were ready to shoot him. And he said, this guy the Guatemalan stood up, the preacher, he said, listen, he said, we are preaching Jesus Christ. We're not here to cause any problems or any whatever. We're not part of any terrorist group. We're not doing anything for our government. We're here representing God on this earth. And if you're going to shoot us, then go ahead and shoot us. But we got work to do. And if you're going to let us go now, because we got to get going. And the guy was like, would you just kind of be a little nicer to him? He was thinking that. He said, but unless you let him go. Devotion. I've got work to do. I'm committed to God. I don't have time to deal with issues of life and death as far as I'm concerned. Just let me out if you're going to do it. God needs devoted people. He needs people that have attitudes of humility. He needs people that are honest. He needs people that are sincere. People that are humble. With that kind of an army, with that kind of people, He'll change lives. He will change families. He will change you. That is our heritage. Attitudes. It's incredible. They determine a lot of things, but you probably heard the old saying that our attitude determines our altitude. Acts chapter 5, verse 41. After the apostles had been beaten, they departed from the council, rejoicing that they were kind of worthy to suffer. They were all excited about it. What an attitude. Determines what they were able to do. Our attitude also determines our direction. Our following Jesus. A wrong attitude can send us away in a different direction. Without a strong commitment, without really feeling like we need Him. It determines how high we will go with Him, and it will determine where we end up in eternity. So really, what controls your attitude? A lot of times people think, well, I just kind of go with the flow. You treat me well and I'm good, and if not, then, well, watch out, because I got an attitude. Truthfully, I used to be that way. Doesn't work too well, though. Circumstances, people, money, activities, all kinds of things. We allow anything out there to actually change our attitude, to cause our response to be a certain way, when actually you are the one that's in control of your attitude. Some years ago, there was a fellow named Viktor Frankl, psychologist, Jewish background, found himself in Auschwitz German concentration camp as a prisoner. As he's in there, he's watching all the action going on amongst the prisoners, and it is not a place that any human being ever wants to be. Starved to death. He described times that when one person was about to pass away and he'd be laying there stretched out, that the crowds, the men and the women, would be standing just looking over them, watching the person die, analyzing, looks like his shoes are better than mine. I guess nobody else is going to take those. It's just so incredible what they're thinking. And here's the person laying there. And he said that just really works on you, like you can't imagine. And he said, but what he noticed too was the fact that people, even though the circumstances were the same and so brutal and so harsh and so cruel, that people responded differently depending on their attitude. And he wrote in a book this. He said that the last of human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. I can be different in spite of whatever. I'm going to choose what I'm going to be. Much like what Joshua talks about in Joshua 24:15. Choose you this day who you'll serve. It's a matter of choice. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing out there. And he talked about the comparison to all these other people. You choose what you're going to be doing. Or you can look at the words that the Apostle Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8, when he says, have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. And he talked about what Jesus did in giving up his godliness. He didn't count that like robbery. He just went ahead and gave it up, made himself nothing, became a servant even to the point of death. Jesus chose his attitude while he was hanging on the cross, when so many others were doing whatever as they were being crucified. Our attitude, when we get down to it, determines several things. It determines who you are. Think about it. When you meet somebody coming down through here, you look at them. You may not be thinking you're thinking this, but you're looking at them and you're analyzing who they are, and you say, oh, here comes so-and-so that behaves this way. And there are probably a few people that you know that when you see them coming, you think, let me go the other direction, because of their attitude. Or you see somebody go, I always love being with that person because of his attitude. Your attitude tells a lot about it. It's just who you are. And who you are today decides who you are or what you will become. So we talk about attitudes because it'll make or break you as a Christian, as a human being, as a student, as a husband, as a wife, as a grandparent, as a young child, as whatever. It molds who you are. Watch your attitude. It determines where you go, not just in this life, and that's part of it. You know, we talk about certain people turn out certain ways, and well, that's just the way they are. I mean, they went so far and they did such and such. Well, we all expected of them because you could see that's what they're going to be from early on. You also say, well, when they passed on from this life, we know where they're at. Their attitude determined where they went. Determines your influence, and that's what we've been talking about. The impact that we make on one another. Our attitude. We share that. Now I know we're supposed to guard it, we're supposed to be a certain way, but it's nice to be around people that have that great attitude because it does influence us. It does make an impact. It makes a difference. Who you are as an individual. And what you say will make a difference in the lives of individuals. Your attitude. Thus God puts these stories out here. There are a lot of other things that happen, but these stories are there so you can analyze how they were. And you can understand what God is after in His kingdom. What a difference we can make when we don't allow bad things to influence our attitude. But rather we become what we become because of what Jesus is. And we allow good attitudes to influence the lives of others. Things like generosity, humility, kindness, love that we sing about. It's going to determine your altitude and your direction. How's your attitude this morning? Between you and God, maybe there's some heavy praying that needs to be done. Maybe this morning you need to respond to the gospel invitation because you've never committed to Christ. Or maybe you've committed and you've gone back on your commitment. Need some readjustments. We sing a song to encourage you to come forward while we stand and sing.